Walk us through the typical process when you're starting a new investigation like Bronwyn, and what kind of legal loopholes and challenges do you typically face when you're trying to unravel these cold cases which have baffled authorities for years? What kind of things don't we see or hear when we listen to your podcast?
Well, what you don't see or hear is me doing whatever I can, haranguing people and making calls and sending emails and scouring archives to try to get every possible document, record, piece of paper, newspaper clipping, letter, memo, finding, everything that could be potentially relevant to a case that I've decided to take on. And I do this because I need to understand and read and reread and underline and circle and highlight things in these documents that I believe may be helpful to me long before I've tried to interview anybody. I believe that the best method for me, and it's probably different for others, but uh, it works for me, is just hours and then days and sometimes weeks and weeks of just careful, reflective reading and rereading of the material until I feel like I know it really well. And then I'm just so much better off when I need to do the interviews that are going to be the mainstay, the the significant parts of the podcast series, because I'll know the detail at least as well as the person I'm interviewing. Sometimes I know it better. I know their statements and their evidence better than they do because they haven't thought about it for years. And I'm reading documents going back to, say, 1998 or 1985 or 1982 when they made those statements. They've forgotten a lot of this detail, but it's there in black and white. It's in recordings that were made at the time. It's in statements that they've signed off. So if I become so familiar with that material, I'm more confident when I'm doing an interview. I'm um, asking better questions. I'm potentially extracting more material and more answers than would have been thought possible. Um, that's the first stage, and you don't hear that because that's kind of um, just part of the you know the dark art behind the scenes.
And how important is it in terms of your collaboration with law enforcement agencies? We heard a little bit about your interactions with Dr. Kirsty Wright and some of those important forensic officials and government officials, police, not only from the standpoint of maintaining your factuality in your reporting, but also in terms of engaging the audience emotionally and maintaining integrity in your work.
Yeah, I want to maintain independence as a journalist, and at the same time, I want to make sure that I can um, potentially help a law enforcement agency or a homicide unit if I get information that I think they really need to be onto as well. And that might sound a little bit conceited, what the journo podcaster thinks that he can help the homicide unit. But the reality is that a lot of people who listen to podcasts are not picking up the phone to talk to the cops, but they are sending me emails. They are sending me messages on Facebook or through the website for the podcast. And they're doing that because they feel like they've got a connection with the podcast or with me that um, that is important, that makes a lot of sense. And they don't care about Crime Stoppers.
Yeah.
They don't know anyone at Crime Stoppers. They don't know cops in the homicide unit. So it does make a whole lot of sense that podcast journalists who have won trust and respect from their listenership will get information from people who haven't previously come forward. But I think we've got a really fundamental problem with the attitude of a lot of people involved in law enforcement. And I haven't put my finger on whether the attitude is the product of them being territorial. They've a view perhaps that their job as homicide cops or senior detectives wearing badges and having the right to carry guns is to investigate these murders, and a journalist with a microphone can just fuck right off. You know, do they feel threatened potentially because we might get information that they're not getting? Well, we do that. We do get that information. Do they believe that we'll destroy their potential to solve a case by getting information that we then broadcast before they've had a chance to put operational tactics into play? Maybe that's probably part of it. I think that's a far-fetched scenario in most cases. My gut feeling is that they just haven't adjusted to a modern era where it makes a whole lot of sense for them, with proper protocols, to have dialogue, to build a bridge with a podcast, with a true crime series. It is, I think, just really weird that we haven't, for example, in the Bronwyn podcast series, been contacted by any senior representative of the New South Wales Police Force to say, hey, this case that you're working on, it's still an unsolved for us. Do you reckon we could provide someone from the New South Wales Police in an interview in one of your episodes talking about how we're really interested in this case, we're still looking at it, we have never given up, and that way some of your listeners who know stuff could contact that copper? I mean, that's just sort of, public engagement 101. It is so obvious. And none of the highly paid communications professionals, none of the senior officers of the New South Wales Police have thought about that. Or if they have thought about it, they've ruled it out. I don't need anything from the New South Wales Police. Like, I don't need them to give me anything. I don't ask them for anything. But I shake my head at the failure of them to say, why don't we utilize this podcast that is reaching so many more people than our Crime Stoppers ads, that has this sort of, that has this captive audience? Why don't we utilize it, see if we can get one of our detectives on there talking about the case, and we'll give him a really careful, controlled script so he doesn't stray off and blow anything up, and we might get something out of it. I mean, do you find that weird?